Welcome back to Law and Crime Live. I'm Stacey Delicat. You have been listening to a replay from yesterday of a Florida jury delivering the death sentence to Donald Smith for the rape and murder of 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle. And earlier this hour, we had an exclusive emotional interview here on the Law and Crime Network with Cherish's father, Billy Giroux, where he shared his thoughts on the trial, how he plans to move forward, and how he hopes his little girl will be remembered. You can see that interview, if you missed it, in just a little while on our website, lawandcrime.com. In the meantime, though, we want to get back to the other big trial we are following today in Green Bay, Wisconsin. That is the murder trial of 40-year-old George Burch, who is charged in the murder of Nicole Vanderhayden back in May 2016. I'm joined now on set by Vincent Hill, law enforcement analyst. Vincent, thanks for being here with us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Great to have you here in the studio. Now, the trial is on a short break while a few legal issues are worked out in the courtroom between the attorneys, but let's talk about how it has been going so far. First of all, you and I were chatting during the break about how this is a tough case because the prosecution obviously trying to prove that George Burch did kill Nicole Vanderhayden, saying that the two of them met at a bar that night, they had sex, and then he killed her and disposed of her body. But the defense is arguing that he didn't do it, that it's Nicole's boyfriend, Douglas Dietrich, that did it. And they're introducing a lot of evidence and a lot of lines of questioning that are sort of raising that doubt, painting that picture that maybe Dietrich did do it, right? Is this a tough case for prosecutors?
Yeah, it's very tough. And this is the trial of the century for Green Bay, a city that only sees about 4 murders a year. Here's a very high-profile case that has all the things for a Law and Order TV series. You have the boyfriend, you have this guy, mysterious guy at the bar. You have the guy at the bar saying the boyfriend did it. You have the boyfriend saying the guy at the bar did it. So it's a very tough case. And you have to realize it only takes one juror to believe Birch's story for an acquittal. Just one juror, a hung jury, and then what do we have? Because Dietrich's not on trial here, Birch is on trial here. So, of course, the prosecution has to prove that Birch did it. And if there's that reasonable doubt, then we have a problem.
You know, one of the biggest issues in this case and what the defense is trying to prove is that Birch didn't have any motive. He just met the woman that night. Regular people don't meet someone, have a romantic relationship with them, and then just decide to murder them and ditch their body, right? What do you make of that? We know that Nicole and Douglas were arguing earlier that night. There were texts sent back and forth. She was upset that he had maybe been seeing some other women. There are witnesses, friends of theirs, who say they had been arguing that night. And as you said, it's all the elements of a TV show, the angry boyfriend, right? Seeing other women. What do how do what do the jurors make of this, not really knowing a motive that Birch would have had?
And that's it. Any crime, you have to prove motive. Here's this guy, he meets her at the bar, they're drunk, they're drinking, they're supposedly going to have sex. What would be the motive? But myself as an investigator, I'm looking at this boyfriend who told me, yes, we've been arguing. Yes, there's text messages here. Yes, we have a history of back and forth. He accused me of sleeping with women. So I'm sure that's weighing on the jury's mind as well. Like, who's the better suspect in this? The guy that was getting these text messages just hours before, or this complete stranger who says, I met her at a bar, which, I mean, we're both adults. We know, yes, it does happen. People meet people in bars. They go out. They have one-night stands. So that story itself is not an illogical story.
Right. I mean, there is one other little piece here, and that is that George Birch was accused of murder 20 years ago, of murdering a man 20 years ago, but he was acquitted. Now, the judge has ruled that prosecutors can't introduce that. The judge said because he was acquitted, it is irrelevant. But that's interesting. I mean, what are the chances for one person to be accused of murder twice? And does this, in your mind, even though we know the jury doesn't know this and he was acquitted, does the fact that he was accused and involved in this situation before make him any more likely to be guilty this time?
I think it does, because lightning doesn't strike twice. And as an investigator, there's no such thing as a coincidence. 20 years ago, you're charged with murder. Somehow they developed him as a suspect. DNA evidence, which wasn't available 20 years ago, which is available in this case, tied him to Nicole, and it made him a suspect. So I don't think there's a coincidence there, but the jury can't hear that side of that story.
Right. And you mentioned the DNA evidence. Investigators say that DNA and cell phone evidence link Birch to the crime scene, including the field where her body was found, her naked body was found, as well as the spot where her bloody clothes were dumped. So certainly they do have that DNA evidence. I mean, another piece of evidence that we have been talking about is the fact that Douglas Dietrich, the boyfriend, claims he was wearing a Fitbit at that time, and it's unclear that the jury may not know what the Fitbit data exactly will show. But first of all, how unusual is it for prosecutors to even say, okay, we want to introduce Fitbit data? Because this is something we've only had for the last, couple of years, right? And what could it show? I guess a person's heart rate, if they're sleeping. I mean, beyond that, what really could it show? How many steps
the
person took that day? But
right, but that's assuming that Douglas had on the Fitbit. Just because he wears it throughout the day, we don't know if he wears it at night. I personally own an Apple Watch that I wear to the gym and to the gym only. I don't wear it through the night, even though it has the sleep app, the breathing app, and all of those other apps. I don't wear it. So we're assuming that Douglas, his story is correct, that yes, I had on my Fitbit and it proves I was sleeping, but it doesn't really prove anything.
Right. Just interesting that is playing a part, just a sign of the times, I guess, that we are in right now. Going back to the DNA evidence, I mean, DNA evidence alone is not enough, right, to prove that Birch committed this murder, because he's even admitting that they had, sexual intercourse that night.
Yeah, absolutely. So then what do you have to say, yes, he killed her, other than the DNA? Because, yes, he said, we've had a relationship.
Yeah, and Birch's attorneys, their theory that they're trying to give the jury is the reason that his DNA is at the crime scene and where her clothing was found is that Dietrich held a gun to his head when he discovered the two of them in the truck having sex, killed her, and then said to Birch, "You better help me ditch this body right now." It is kind of a far-fetched story in a sense, but stranger things have happened, I suppose, and we do have a live feedback in the courtroom right now. Should we let's actually listen in live to what the judge has to say, and then we'll come back out and discuss.
That the information we got back from Progressive showed that the vehicle did not move. The court finds that legally there needs to be testimony from someone as to the reliability of Nikki's snapshot device to lay a proper foundation. And that testimony is not available. So you are to disregard that particular answer, all right? Otherwise, we've addressed everything else, and we're ready to proceed. We'll go for another 20 minutes before lunch. And Detective Slinger, why don't you retake the stand? You're still under oath. Counsel, whenever you're ready, you can continue.
Left off, well, we were discussing the vehicle of Nicole Vanderheiden. Remember that?
Correct.
Okay. And that was in evidence at Brown County Sheriff's Office at that time?
It got transported to the Wausau Crime Lab, and then when they were done processing it, it was transported back to the Brown County Sheriff's Office, correct?
At a certain point, did investigators release the vehicle back to Nicole's family?
Yeah, once it had been processed and we got it back, it was later in June, I can't recall the exact date, I made contact with Nicole's father and made arrangements to return the vehicle to them.
Prior to releasing the vehicle, did you attempt to start that vehicle?
I did. The keys that were sent with the vehicle to the crime lab were the keys that were found in the hallway at the residence on that key rack. I attempted to start the vehicle using those keys and was unsuccessful.
Can you describe why you were unsuccessful or how you were unsuccessful?
Well, it was embarrassing because I had called the Myers to come and pick up the vehicle and I couldn't get started. I put in the ignition, turned the key, lights would come on, radio would come on, heater would start. Couldn't figure it out. So I went back and talked to our mechanics and they hooked up a computer thing to it to see if maybe something had happened with the battery or the computer that had messed with the starter. That wasn't it. After a little bit of thinking, we realized that some of the GM vehicles back around that time had what are called valet keys. that are only used to open the door and used to go to the accessory position in the car.
And the key you attempted to use, where was that key located?
Those were the keys that were located in the hallway at the residence.
Of whose residence?
Of the Dietrich residence, I'm sorry.
Were any other vehicles for that vehicle located, or were any other keys rather for that vehicle located in the residence?
No.
Were you ultimately able to start the vehicle?
Yes. Finally, when we had realized that, after some time, I knew I had Nikki's car keys that were located with the rest of her property on the side of the highway that were in her purse. So I proceeded to get a hold of the evidence technician, remove that key from evidence temporarily, or not temporarily, permanently, bring that out to the vehicle, use that key, and then the car started right up. And the vehicle was returned to Heather's father, or I'm sorry, Nicole's father.
So we discussed the release of Mr. Dietrich. After that, did the investigation continue?
Correct. We were back at well, technically square one. We still had that unknown answer as to how Nicole got home that morning. So that's where our investigation focused. We went back to a video from from the sardine can. If you recall, there was that one text message where Nicole had sent a message to Doug stating, "I found someone. Good thing I found someone." We worked to try and identify who that person was by watching video surveillance. We were able to identify that male subject and later make contact with him.
And what other, apart from reviewing surveillance video, what other techniques are you utilizing at that point?
So the people that we were coming across, like I just explained, the male that we had identified, Jason Lemons, he voluntarily met with me, provided a written statement on his encounter with Nicole that night, also provided a DNA buccal swab consensually that was sent to the lab to test against the Y profiles or the DNA that we had already been discovering on some of the items. There was other individuals that we were trying to track down, again continuing to watch surveillance video from a bunch of different locations, including like the Greystone Ale House, the Shell gas station, which were all locations, Brown County Sheriff's Department, which all have video surveillance of that general area.
And what was the purpose of reviewing those video surveillance images?
Again, to try and see if a car would have come and gone in that time frame that we had. You don't think about it at the time, but when you sit down and watch that intersection at that time of night, there is still plenty of traffic activity for a little while there, so it was pretty difficult to try and pick anything out in particular. We didn't have much luck with that route.
And are you continuing to send items down to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab?
Correct. So I'm also in contact with Kevin Scott continuously, he'd make phone calls to me daily, telling me his findings, and we would briefly discuss the other items that I had in evidence, and we would discuss it together to try and decide what would be a best item that he may be able to extract any sort of DNA evidence from. He had told me, you know, some of the specific items were too bloody for him to test because I'm sure he'll testify later to the fact that the blood would, you know, overpower any sort of touch DNA or anything that would have been there.
And during this time, you're in communication with Kevin Scott regarding those results?
Correct.
And at a certain point, were you advised of a DNA hit?
Yes. So on August 19th, 2016, Kevin Scott had called me and told me that one of the recent items that we had sent into the lab for analysis, a sock that was taken off of Nikki's body, he was able to extract a DNA sample from that sock that he then entered into a DNA database, so to speak, and he was able to get a DNA match.
And who was the individual that Mr. Scott advised that match was for?
He advised me that it was for a George Stephen Birch.
Prior to that occasion, I believe you said August 19th, had you had any knowledge of Mr. Birch?
I had not.
What did you do at that point?
So obviously you can imagine we had a little bit of spirit in the office that day as we were continually sending items in and not getting much luck back other than the unknown Y profile. So as soon as I got that name, I sat down at the computer and checked our police databases. We have a ProPhoenix database, which is a database that the Brown County Sheriff's Office as well as other entities within Brown County use. And then the Green Bay Police Department uses a program called GURP, Green Bay Electronic Reporting Program, that we also have access to. So I checked those two databases for any police contacts that Mr. Birch may have had with them.
Did you find an occasion of a police contact?
I did. In June 8th of 2016, I noted a police contact with the Green Bay Police Department.
And did you look into that incident?
I did.
Not specifically, but as far as the reports?
I did.
And were you able to locate a cell phone extraction associated with that case?
Yes.
And who was that for?
The cell phone extraction was that of George Stephen Birch's.
And did you review that extraction?
I did. I contacted the Green Bay Police Department. In particular, these types of records are typically kept digitally due to the high volume. It would be tough to print out that much information. Contacted them, requested a copy of that, made arrangements with Sergeant Yankee so that she could go and pick that item up for me and bring that back to me at the Sheriff's Department.
And did you personally have the opportunity to review that material?
I did. I got it later that day, put it into my computer, briefly reviewed some of the messages and things like that that were located on the phone.
Did you locate any email addresses for the defendant?
Yes, there was on a lot of your phones that you get nowadays with smartphones, whether it be an Apple or a Samsung, you typically can associate your email address with it so that you can get emails to your phone. This particular phone was a Samsung, or this particular download indicated to me that it was a Samsung Galaxy phone, and that it also had a Gmail account associated to it. I believe it was sburch214@gmail.com or something like that. I don't know if that was exactly it.
And why was that significant to you?
Well, information that I had through recent trainings and recent conversation was with coworkers is that Google has this thing called the Google Dashboard that is associated with your email account, which will track your locations based upon GPS, Wi-Fi, and cell phone tower data.
And ultimately, did you draft a subpoena for those records?
I did not personally. I directed or worked with Sergeant Lopnow to do that. He took the information that we had based off from that download, and he completed a search warrant for to Google for those results.
What other investigative steps were taken at that point?
At that point, it was just background, finding out who is George Birch, what are his ties to Green Bay, where does he live, where does he work. I had contacted one of the officers that was involved in that call from June 8th, who I knew, and asked him if he recalled anything about that or remembered anything about that, and he said he did, and he said, as a matter of fact,
Judge, may we approach briefly?
Let's come forward.
We don't need to excuse the jury.
Okay, welcome back to Law and Crime Live. As you can see in the video box here, there is a little break in court. The attorneys are holding a sidebar with the judge in this murder trial against George Burch. Vincent Hill, law enforcement analyst, here with me. We were just listening to some of the testimony from the lead detective in this case, Detective Brian Slinger. This was kind of an interesting part we just heard. He's talking about how they are investigating Nicole's murder, and they are trying to find any kind of DNA hit on evidence. One piece of evidence he says they had was a sock that was found on Nicole's body, and he says they were able to extract DNA from the sock that matched George Birch in a database. They said prior to that, George Birch wasn't on their radar. Vincent, what do we make about this? The fact that they ran this DNA and Birch pops up in the database.
Well, we have to question why his DNA is on file, right? We can't say it was the verdict or charge 20 years ago, because 20 years ago it wasn't mandatory to extract DNA from someone convicted of a felony. Plus, he was not convicted. But his DNA is on file for a reason. He was convicted of something which made a court extract his DNA to keep on file as a known felon.
Interesting. I want to come back to that. Let's go back into the courtroom, and when they take a break in a few minutes, we'll come back to this part about the DNA.
And I'd also received a picture of Mr. Birch and also found it on his Facebook account, so I had an idea of what he looked like. I went on to 15th Street in the city of Green Bay, which runs off of West Mason Street, and as I turned down the street, started driving northbound, I observed Mr. Birch standing out in front of the residence on 15th.
Do you recall that address?
515, I believe. I could be
said
wrong.
512 15th, is that correct?
Sure. Apologize.
And-
Counsel, I remember too, one thing I forgot to tell all the attorneys, the jury's having, some of the jurors are having a hard time hearing your questions. Make sure you speak up. Go
Sure.
ahead.
And were you ultimately able to determine whose residence that was?
Through a pattern of behavior, we saw him coming and going on a regular basis, so based on that, believed that George lived there. We didn't want to alert him to our surveillance techniques, so I didn't make any contact at the residence. I didn't make contact with the potential owner of the residence, fearing that, it may lead to him fleeing or whatever.
Directing your attention to September 7th of 2016, on that date, did you make an arrest of Mr. Birch?
I did.
And were you personally involved in that arrest?
I was.
Did you have personal contact with Mr. Birch on that day?
Briefly.
And the person you had contact, do you see that person in court today?
I do.
Could you please point out what that person's wearing and where that person is sitting?
George Birch is wearing a blue and gray plaid button-down shirt, long sleeve. Looks basically the same today as he did then, besides some longer hair.
And could you please point out for the record where he is sitting?
He's seated to my right, second one from the end at the defense table.
I'd ask the record reflect the witness identified the defendant.
Any objection? The record will reflect that the witness has identified the defendant in open court. You may continue.
Did you later obtain a buccal swab from Mr. Birch?
Yes. After his arrest, we compiled a search warrant, had it reviewed, and then ultimately signed by a judge. And then I went back out to the Brown County Jail and executed that search warrant.
Was that buccal swab ultimately entered into evidence in this case?
It was. I took the buccal swab from Mr. Birch and then immediately turned that over to Sergeant Thomas, who then in turn brought that item directly down to the Wisconsin Crime Lab so that it could be tested.
In addition to Mr. Birch's buccal, you mentioned at length, you continue to send additional evidence down to the crime lab, is that correct?
Correct. During that time, after Doug's release, we obviously continued to explore other investigative means. We kept our minds open on the investigation, called in numerous people, including Nicole's ex-husband, who came in voluntarily, provided us a statement, provided us his cell phone, provided us with a buccal swab, and there was also other individuals that we had found at the bar that night that we ultimately were able to track down and talk to and get their DNA swabs as well. Like I said, we didn't know how she had gotten home that night, so that's kind of where we were at.
In addition to the various buccal swabs of individuals, are you also sending swabs from Nicole's body?
Correct. So we went through the 80 or however many swabs that Dr. Rogalska spoke about earlier, picked locations throughout that body that we felt that there may be some sort of touch DNA present.
Are you also sending swabs and items from Nicole's clothing?
Yes, most of those were sent right away, just so that we could make sure that we determined, in fact, those were her clothes with the blood and the DNA that would have been on those clothes, so that we could just make certain that we had, the crime scenes defined.
And when all of those items were sent to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, did you follow proper protocol in doing that?
Yes, we fill out, like I explained earlier, evidence transmittal sheets, which puts our property number and our case number on it. We give that to our evidence custodian at the sheriff's office. She goes in, picks those items out. We double check the numbers on the stickers with the numbers I asked for, and then we package them and send them to the lab. On occasion, some of the stuff was driven down there personally by one of our investigators, if it would have been more of a rush item.
I'm sorry, in addition to the swabs from Nicole's body and her clothing, did you also send swabs recovered from the cord that was located in this case?
Correct.
In addition to those items, also swabs from the residence, the Nikki and Doug's residence were sent to the lab as well?
Correct, as well as swabs from Doug and from the two children on his from her other marriage.
I have no further questions at this time. We did discuss that Sergeant Slinger would be recalled to discuss additional portions of his testimony at a later date. Understood.
Well, it's almost 12:15, ladies and gentlemen. It's a good time for our lunch break before we start cross-examination. 1:15. Have a good lunch.
All right.
Welcome back to Law and Crime Live. I'm Stacey Delicat, joined on set here by Vincent Hill, law enforcement analyst, and you are watching a live feed out of a Green Bay, Wisconsin courtroom where the judge has just said they will take a lunch break in the murder trial of 40-year-old George Burch, charged in the murder of Nicole Vanderhayden back in March of 2016. We just heard the lead detective in this case talk about how they identified George Burch as a suspect. They were running swabs of DNA that they had found all over Nicole's body, her clothes from the scene, and they finally found a match in the system, and that was George Burch. When we spoke just a few minutes ago at the last break, you noted it's interesting that he came up as a match because in order to be in a DNA database, you may have had to been convicted of something.
Exactly, and it makes you question what was he convicted of, because typically the law says if you're convicted of a felony, we extract your DNA to have on file. They don't do it for misdemeanors. They don't do it for jaywalking. It's usually a pretty serious felony where they extract DNA. So as a juror, I'm thinking, why was this guy's DNA on file? What do we not know about that we haven't heard?
Could it have been something like a DUI?
It could have been if the charges were felonious. Yes, absolutely. It could have been DUI. He could have had to submit to a blood and alcohol test. So yeah, it could have been that. It doesn't necessarily mean it was an assault, especially a sexual assault. But we don't know, but it also makes you question why. I'm
just wondering, and you know a lot more about this than I do in terms of when DNA samples are taken, but we also heard the detective talk, the lead investigator, the detective talk about how there were other people, other men that Nicole had come in contact with that night on the bar that they were able to see through surveillance video, and the detective said he interviewed some of them and that one consented to an interview and consented to a DNA swab. There was no match. So in that case, that friend of hers who she had encountered in the bar, who they did name Jason Lemons, consented to the DNA swab. Would that swab not be put in the database then? Is that the disconnect? Because he said, yeah, I'll give you a DNA swab to prove I'm innocent. He wasn't convicted of anything, but he submitted to the DNA.
Well, there's no reason to put it in the database because he was eliminated as a suspect in that case.
Just to clarify that for some people who may have been confused. So again, all morning we've been hearing from Detective Brian Slinger, the lead investigator on this case. But yesterday was some of the more yesterday and on Wednesday was some of the more interesting testimony in this case when we heard from Nicole Vanderhayden's boyfriend, her live-in boyfriend, the father of her baby, Douglas Dietrich, on the stand. He is who the defense says killed her. Was there anything that stood out to you from his testimony over the last couple of days?
Well, besides how nonchalant he was just so matter of fact. I mean, you're talking about the mother of your small child, someone you live with, someone you have a relationship with. In watching that, I saw no emotion. And even when the text messages came up, I saw no emotion. He kind of played it off. He even played it off in his responses. You know, so it kind of tells me that this isn't the first time she sent those type of text messages, and he kind of just laughingly played it off in his response just to throw her off, to shut her up. But the lack of emotion in this guy, again, it just takes one juror to say, well, maybe this guy did do it because he was upset about these text messages and her accusations of these other women.
Right, and you mentioned the law and order nature of this case, right? This is a case people love to watch. Attractive woman murdered. Was it the boyfriend? Was it someone that she had a one-night stand with? But isn't it, you know, is the American public trained to think that the first suspect is always the boyfriend, is always the husband? Because we've seen so many cases play out like this. You know, Lacey Peterson, whatever it is, that we're always looking at the boyfriend or the husband first.
Yeah, I would say the public is definitely trained like that. But as an investigator, I look at the person who was most intimate with my victim. I don't look at a perfect stranger who she just met. I look at the person who was most intimate, who had the most to gain from her death. For all we know, there could have been some issue of he may have had to pay child support. Now that she's out of the way, he doesn't have to do that. He has full custody. There were the text messages. There were these accusations of other women. So, of course, anyone that's closest to the victim is the person you look at first.
Well, let's go back and replay some of that testimony from Douglas Dietrich yesterday as he was on the stand, and then we'll come back out and discuss.
Showing what's been marked as exhibit number 44. Can you identify that photograph?
There's the picture of Nikki and I at the Sandlot, I think during the Steel Panther concert while they were playing, I believe.
I would request that 44 be admitted into evidence and ask for permission to publish that as well.
Subject to recross, any objection to 44?
No, Your Honor.
44 is received, it can be published.
Doug, is the picture on the screen up there, is that the same picture that's in exhibit 44?
Yes, it is.
I should ask, I didn't put this on the record before, the picture that was up on the screen and published for the jury previously, the one of you and Dylan, is that what was depicted in exhibit 43?
Yes, it is.
Doug, you were asked extensively about text messages between you and Nikki. I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 41, and I'm going to ask you to reference that. So beginning at numbers 3, 4, 5, and 6 of those text messages listed, those are all messages from Nikki which certainly voice her frustration and use some vulgar language toward you and things of that nature.
Yes.
So that was some of Douglas Dietrich's testimony from the stand yesterday. He was the live-in boyfriend, the father of Nicole Vanderhayden's baby, and he is the person that the defense wants the jury to think murdered Nicole. So Vincent, who is here with me on set, Vincent Hill, law enforcement analyst, you said you didn't find that performance or how he was on the stand to be, or that convincing.
Not at all. I mean, again, it's the mother of your son. You have a relationship with this person. They're going over these text messages that really should anger you, just rehashing those text messages. But the level of emotion from him was not there. Not something I would expect from someone who was traumatized by the loss of his loved one.
Now, does it matter that we also heard testimony earlier in the trial from some of the detectives who interviewed him, who said he was very emotional when they told him Nicole's body had been found? One of the detectives even said he was hyperventilating, you know, that they believed his reaction, at least initially, right after they told him the news and questioned him. Does that make a difference if the jurors themselves didn't see that?
I don't think it does, because, you know, if I'm accused of something or I did something, of course, when police show up, I'm going to act a certain way to throw them off the scent. So, of course, I'm going to put on this performance. I'm going to have the crocodile tears. I'm going to hyperventilate. I'm going to do all of that. But I don't think it has anything to do with the case or the decision of this case or what the jury would think.
Although I would think law enforcement personnel like yourself are trained to sort of spot what is a performance and what is, you know, authentic grief, what is real reaction. Obviously, some people are really good and maybe you can't tell. But it seemed like from the testimony of the detectives that they didn't have, that they believed his initial reaction.
They may have believed his initial reaction, but there was an arrest, right? He was in jail for 17 days for a reason. So they may have believed his reaction, but they also listened to his statements. They also looked at the text messages. They talked to other people who said they had a rocky relationship. So they may have believed the performance, or they may have led him to believe that they believed his performance. Because one thing about investigation, you don't always have to tell the truth to the individual you're investigating. You just have to let them believe that you're on their side.
Let's continue listening to some more of Douglas Dietrich's testimony from yesterday.
That's from you to Nikki.
Yes.
And then the next message, number 9, is a response from Nikki to you, and what's that response?
Sure, you still love whores.
And your response to that is in number 10. What is it?
LMAO, ... Really, question mark?
And then messages 11 and 12 are again messages from Nikki voicing her frustration. In 13, you respond with what?
And on 13, I said, Durr, DURRRR.
What did that mean to you?
Just, I don't know, you're being kind of stupid, silly, I don't know.
And the next text message, number 14, is also from you to Nikki. What is that?
LOL, I'm with Greg at the bar.
And Nikki responded to you.
What bar?
And then she sent a series of messages to you that again were vulgar and demonstrated that she was potentially upset with you, right?
Yes.
And then 19 in particular, I believe you referenced this text message. She sends you a message at about midnight, and what does that message say?
Whatever, sardine can with your so-called friends, but good thing I found someone I know.
So is that the message that you were referring to earlier when you said you believe she ran into a friend?
Yes.
And your response to her in number 20?
Stop, babe, ... I'll be there soon.
Welcome back. Again, we were listening to some more testimony from Douglas Dietrich, the boyfriend and father of Nicole Vander Hayden's baby, up on the stand yesterday. And Vincent Hill, law enforcement analyst with me here. We know that Doug Dietrich was the first suspect. Police they arrested him. He was in jail for 17 days before they released him. As someone who has done detective work, done investigative work, obviously they didn't have the evidence to keep him, right? What would they have needed, besides a confession, to keep him and charge him with her murder?
Well, first I question why he was arrested and held for 17 days without evidence. Because when you go to a district attorney or a magistrate with your probable cause for the arrest, you have to have the probable cause, the circumstances of why you're arresting him. So I'd be curious to see what that charging order said, but it came down to they didn't have enough evidence. Now, anyone could argue that, okay, there was blood at the house or around the house, but if you go around my apartment, you may see my blood somewhere. It doesn't mean that someone assaulted me or tried to kill me. It happens throughout the course of living. We get cut and our blood stays in our house. DNA stays at the house. So it'd be really hard to say that Douglas Dietrich had anything to do with this simply based on DNA. They had an intimate relationship. His DNA would be on her body. The investigator talked about touch DNA. That would be on her body. Essentially, I touched Nicole and my DNA is on her body because they had an intimate relationship. So based on that, I think investigators realized, well, we really don't have enough, even with the text messages, even with people saying the relationship is rocky, to say there was motive and opportunity to commit this crime.
Yeah. All that aside, though, obviously the defense attorneys want to paint this picture that he did, and there is this idea that perhaps he did have some motive because they were arguing and may have been involved with other women. Let's go back to his testimony on the stand from yesterday, and we'll come back out and discuss.
It was when the concert ended and I had last seen her and we were going to the bathroom.
And you knew she was mad at you? She was pissed at you? You had gotten those text messages?
You keep on saying that. Like, I don't know when you're saying I knew she was mad. There wasn't a point that I knew she was mad. I mean, there was some sense to it. I took him as that she's just kidding around. I mean, she did like to joke around too. I mean, sending sarcastic text messages, and some are like, you know, it's hard to interpret.
Nikki has walked off in the past before with you, right? Like the Packer game when she walked off, when it was really cold out. You remember that?
Yes.
Was that a scary incident?
Yeah, it was not, I mean, not really scary. I mean, it was kind of like, what are you doing, Nikki? You know?
She tried to walk out without a coat in very cold weather, and she ended up in the back of a squad car, right?
Yeah, she did. And like a block and a half from the bar, she like ran out, and I was closing my tab, and she got upset with me for no reason and ran off, and I was a couple hundred feet behind her, and by the time I got out behind around the edge of this other bar that's in the parking lot, I saw her that she was stopped, an officer had stopped her, and she was not very cooperative with them, and they were asking her why and she's just like, oh, I'm just gonna walk home.
So it's your testimony that that was just another one of those times that Nikki just walked off and you had no idea why?
Yeah, I mean, I did not get why she was there. I mean, why she just all of a sudden kind of freaked out like that. I mean, we were there with her family. I believe her brother was right there with me.
But then getting back to the sardine can, you were at the sardine can and Nikki wasn't there, right?
That's correct. When I was there, she
So when
was
you were
not
there,
there.
she was not there.
What was your answer, Mr. Dietrich?
When I was at the sardine can, Nikki was not there.
And you said you knew how Nikki gets, but you say you still weren't worried at that time at all.
I mean, with her, you know, she said she was with she found somebody she knew. I don't know if at that point I even knew. I don't think I had gotten a hold of my friends at that point that they had left. You know, I was drinking, and you know, I was kind of like, you know, what is she doing? You know, is she with friends? Where did she go?
And at that point, you didn't care about meeting up with Nikki at that moment.
No, I was hoping she would, you know, come back to the sardine can.
Do you remember harassing the bartender?
What do you mean? No, I don't recall harassing the bartender.
Do you remember harassing other people at the bar?
I don't recall that. Maybe if I was maybe joking around with them, I don't know what you're referring to. I don't recall that.
Do you remember talking to other women at the bar?
I don't know. Maybe I don't know if the bartender was even male or female. I mean,
Judge, may we approach?
Okay, welcome back. That was Douglas Dietrich on the witness stand from earlier this week in the trial against George Burch, who is charged with Douglas Dietrich's girlfriend's murder, Nicole Vanderhayden. Vincent Hill, law enforcement analyst, that was the cross-examination by Burch's defense team. What do you think they were going at there?
I think they were trying to make Douglas Dietrich look like this guy who didn't care about his girlfriend. The defense mentioned a football game where Nicole walked away, and Douglas pretended like he didn't know why she would just walk away and abandon him and just go on about her way. So they were trying to paint it as there's a history of her wanting to get away from you, and you are the bad guy because she always flees from you because they went to the bar and they weren't at the same bar. So they're trying to paint that picture that Douglas is this womanizing bad guy that Nicole just wants to get away from, to put reasonable doubt in the jury that Birch didn't do this.
Yeah, and we've talked about before that there are sort of a lot of opportunities for the defense to put this reasonable doubt in, and the fact that only one juror needs to think, maybe it was Dietrich that did it. We sort of mentioned that he's a little flat in his affect and his emotion on the stand. I mean, should he have been counseled to be more animated, emotional, grief-stricken?
Yeah, and these are things juries look for. Jurors look for that animation. They look for that emotion. And I noticed in the clip we were just watching, he was actually referring to notes. Why would you need to refer to notes about a tragic event that took the mother of your son? You don't need to refer to notes to remember everything on that night, but yet he's referring to notes and just reading over notes, and he's just so nonchalant that it really seems like it didn't matter to him that Nicole is gone.
Let's go back and listen to some more as we continue to recount Doug Dietrich's testimony.
What about when you smoked weed at the watering hole?
It was one of those vape pens or whatever they call them, and it was I don't know, being like passed around in the crowd, and somebody handed it to me. I don't recall who, and I did take a puff off it.
And you gave Greg your Adderall earlier on May 20th?
I don't recall giving him any of mine, but I don't know.
And then you snorted that amphetamine with Greg at the sardine can?
No, I did not at the sardine can. I mean, are you talking about inside, or what do you mean?
When did you snort amphetamine with Greg or Adderall with Greg?
I don't. I'm trying to recall if I did, because I remember saying to Greg, I don't want to snort any. I don't like that. I do have a prescription for it, and I do take it regularly. The correct way to, and just ingest it. I take it daily, and I just don't like typically snorting anything. So.
But you snorted it on that night, that morning.
I think at some point I did. I don't know if it was like when we were leaving the watering hole, or when we had just maybe gotten to the sardine can. We parked in that back bank parking lot. I think it might have been then. I just don't totally recall when I did.
So you snorted Adderall with Greg?
I think I did a little bit. I'm not certain on that, though.
I'm just looking for a yes or no answer. You snorted amphetamine with Greg?
It's hard to, from all the stories and everything I've heard afterwards, and I just don't know. I would lean towards yes, but I just don't specifically recall that me actually doing it. I remember the opportunity to, and I do remember saying no, that I wasn't going to, but I think because there was like 2 times, and I know one time I said no for sure, and maybe I think the one time I did, and I don't know when that was. I think either when we left the watering hole, or it was in Greg's car, I believe.
And then moving back to when you're at your house, Greg eventually left?
Yeah, after a short time period of us being there.
Dallas left?
Yep, a short time after Greg left.
And then you testified yesterday that you did your nighttime routine?
Yes.
What is that?
Basically, getting a glass of ice water, brushing my teeth, taking my contacts out, washing my face, and then getting ready for bed. Just undressing.
And then you testified that you woke up the next morning. When was that?
I don't know the exact time, but I think it was between like 6 and 7, like 6:30, I'm guessing.
So roughly that's 8 hours since you had saw Nikki, according to your testimony.
Yeah, that would be, I think it was about, I'm guessing around 11 o'clock that I had last seen her.
You did not call the police at 6:30?
No.
You did not call Nicole's sister at 6:30?
No.
You did not call Nicole's mother at 6:30?
No, I did not.
You didn't call any of your friends at 6:30?
No, I did not.
You didn't call your parents?
Nope.
You didn't call your brother?
No, I did not.
You just went back to bed?
Yeah, I was tired. I was hungover, and I had a crying baby, and took care of him and fed him and went back to bed right away.
And you knew where Nikki was at that time?
No, I did not.
And then you woke up again around 11?
Yeah, I think approximately 11 o'clock.
And now it had been 12 hours since you had last seen Nikki?
Correct.
She still wasn't home for Dylan?
No, she was not.
Did you search for Nikki on foot or by vehicle?
No, I did not.
Still didn't call the police?
I did not at that time, no.
Because you knew you didn't have to?
I don't know what I mean, I was starting to get concerned, and because I figured she was out, if she stayed out late, that she was probably going to sleep in as well, and probably feeling it similar to me, hungover and tired, that she was going to sleep it off, that we had a lot to drink that night.
You finally called police around 4:30. Does that sound correct?
Yes.
And that's 17 hours since you last saw her.
Yeah, I think so, yep.
And that's also after her body was already found.
Yeah, at that time, and afterwards I did, yeah, that would be after.
And that's after a large police buildup off Hoffman Road.
Yeah, I was unaware of that police buildup until well after the fact.
Welcome back. That was Douglas Dietrich on this stand being questioned by defense attorneys for George Burch. Now, George Burch is charged in the murder of Nicole Vanderheyden, Douglas Dietrich's girlfriend, the mother of his baby. But Vincent Hill, when we listen to this testimony, we start to say, wait, who's on trial here? Right?
Yeah, absolutely, because that's what the defense wants to do. You heard that defense attorney. Why didn't you call? Why didn't you go look for her? Why didn't you call your mother, her mother? Why'd you go back to sleep? And as an investigator and as a father and a man, the first thing if I wake up and my wife is not at home, I think I might start calling, start texting. Even if we did have an argument, you're not home. We have this young child at home. Where are you?
Yeah. I mean, that was curious to me as well. I mean, first of all, yeah, he's saying, nope, didn't make any calls at 6:30 in the morning, went back to sleep till 11, and I'm sort of wondering, well, I hope the baby was sleeping that long, too. That's a whole other issue, but he says he fed the baby, changed the baby, then went back to bed till 11, and even 11 o'clock is not thinking or starting to get worried about where is my girlfriend and where is the baby's mother.
Right.
I mean, it does seem like the average person's reaction would be, let me start texting and calling everyone, or repeatedly trying to call her phone at least, or text her. But that's not what we heard. So that certainly does not bolster the prosecution's case, does it?
Absolutely. And in all fairness, we don't know what went on in that home on a regular basis. We don't know if Nicole would stay out all night, and that was a normal thing, and Douglas was used to that. But what the defense is trying to plant is, why did it take you so long to report the mother of your child missing? Why did you not alert her family? Why did you not alert your family? What was the big secret that you didn't even want to look for Nicole? And that's what the defense is trying to plant in the jury's head.
Yeah, and again, then we start to forget, wait, this guy isn't even the one on trial here. It's George Burch, this other man who admittedly met her when she had left the bar or at the bar, whatever, admits to having sex with her that night. Now, he says that Dietrich then found them having sex in the car, killed Nicole, held a gun to Burch's head, and said, you're going to help me dispose of this body off in the Meadow Drive, and dump the body. One thing that has played a big part so far in this case in the evidence is these text messages that Nicole and Doug exchanged that night. They had been out at a concert, then they were out at a bar, then they split up. Nicole went to one bar. Doug didn't come to the other bar till later. In the meantime, they're texting back and forth because Nicole is mad at him. She thinks he's talking to other women and so forth. Let's listen now to the testimony that Dietrich gave talking about some of those text messages.
The last area of questioning was that Nikki had left the watering hole. Did you respond angrily to that?
No, I don't believe so.
In fact, at some point you responded asking her to call you?
Yep.
And it was apparent from the text message that Nikki was upset with you.
Yeah, I was kind of just puzzled, and I was talking with friends and, enjoying the night, and I didn't know why she was texting me that way.
And where were you when you were receiving these text messages?
At the watering hole. I don't know where exactly at the watering hole, either between the bar or outside, and in between, talking to various friends, and Greg, Katie, and ran into another group of friends that I hadn't seen in quite some time, and talked with them out by the front bar for, I don't know, I think it was 20, 30 minutes probably, and had some more drinks there, and had another round of shots or two.
And during this time, obviously Nikki's texts are accusatory. Who were you with when you were at the watering hole continuing to have drinks?
I was with Greg, and I believe Katie was still there for a while, and there were some other people that we had ran into. There was an Andrea and her husband, I believe, and I think maybe one or two of their friends that I didn't know, that they're just kind of hanging out by the bar, and another, a Steve that I had known from way back in high school.
At some point in time, you decide to leave the watering hole?
Yes.
Do you know how that came about that you left?
Well, it was, you know, it was one of those things we were kind of like on the way out to leave, and that's when we ran into that group of friends, and then we got chit-chatting, and 5 minutes turned into 20, 30 minutes, and like, well, let's get going. And then I was getting those messages and looked at my phone, and it's like, we got to get going here. Let's go to the sardine can and meet up with everybody.
And when you say let's go, who was the other person that you were
with Greg.
Who was driving from the watering hole to the sardine can?
Greg was.
Is there a reason why Greg drove as opposed to you?
Well, I was pretty intoxicated, so I wasn't going to drive.
And where was your car at that time?
It was parked up in the back side parking lot of the watering hole.
When you left with Greg, did Greg come and pick you up?
I don't really recall if he. I remember walking outside for a little bit, and I don't know where his car was exactly, but he got into his car and left. So
prior to leaving the watering hole, at any point in time while at the watering hole, did you use any substance other than alcohol?
At the watering hole, I believe during the show, I think I did take a puff off this pen type deal, a smoking device or whatever.
And what do you believe was in that device?
I think it was marijuana in there, or a mix of marijuana and tobacco.
Any other substances at the watering hole?
No.
It's fair to say you were pretty intoxicated, though?
Yes, I was. I was drinking pretty heavily.
On the ride from the watering hole to the sardine can, did you have any contact with Nikki?
Yes, I tried calling her, and I think there was a time she didn't answer, and then she answered, and then she was like very ecstatic and wasn't making any sense. And I don't know, I talked to her for like 30 seconds, and like it wasn't, I don't know, she wasn't making any sense. So I handed the phone to Greg and said, here, talk to Nikki. She's not making any sense to me. And then Greg tried to talk to her for a few minutes, and I don't know, I don't recall what Greg was really saying. I think he asked, where are you? And he said something about that she was walking somewhere, and that he had asked, where are you? We'll pick you up and, go wherever. And
so Nikki was pretty upset and animated with you?
yeah, and it was just like her words weren't making any sense. She was just like kind of ecstatically yelling, and I don't know, she was upset.
Did hearing that make you angry?
No, I was just trying to calm her down, and she just wasn't listening. I mean,
And then at some point you gave the phone to Greg,
yep.
and he didn't have any luck in calming her down either?
No. So we even pulled over for a while he was on the phone a few blocks down off of Velp. It was a buddy of mine's old house, and we thought he actually still lived there. And we had pulled up by the driveway, and then somebody actually came out. I remember that somebody came out, and we're like, oh, that's not Josh's house. And we left, and that was somewhere right there is when Greg said she either hung up on him or her phone, it died.
Welcome back. We have been listening to the testimony of Doug Dietrich, the boyfriend of Nicole Vanderhayden. He is not the one on trial in this case, right, Vincent Hill? It is George Birch, a man that Nicole allegedly met the night of her murder when she had left a bar. And the allegation in this case is that George Birch picked her up in the truck. They had sex in the truck. He then killed her and dumped the body. But we know that defense attorneys, Birch's defense attorneys, are trying to say, no, Doug Dietrich did this. Doug Dietrich, who we just heard from on the stand, and we were just hearing about some of the angry text messages the couple had exchanged the night of Nicole's murder. She was upset. She believed he was with other women, talking to other women, perhaps had been cheating. But you brought up an interesting point as we were listening to that. On the defense's theory, if Doug Dietrich did do it and then forced George Birch at gunpoint to help him dispose of the body, why would Doug Dietrich have just said, bye, George, thanks, and let him go, right?
That's exactly right, Stacey. Why leave the only witness to this murder alive? And better yet, since George Birch got away and he's no longer in an imminent threat against his life, why not go to the police immediately and say, hey, this guy just killed his girlfriend, he made me dump the body, here's where I dumped the body. But as far-fetched as the story is, the missing piece is, why would Douglas leave the only witness to this murder alive? It just doesn't make sense, and I'm sure the jury is thinking that as well.
Yeah, certainly a lot of interesting different theories and storylines going here. There is a lot of speculation that George Birch himself will take the stand in this case. Do you think he should?
If he wants to keep up with his story, his facade, yes, he absolutely should take the stand, but I'm sure the prosecution is ready and able to defuse anything he says.
Right.
I mean, I personally think this was a crime of opportunity. George saw Nicole. She was inebriated. She was an easy victim, an easy target. He's a large guy. He could easily overpower her. So when he takes that stand, the prosecution, they're bringing out the big guns to prove that he did it.
But why kill her, I guess, is the question that a lot of jurors may also have. We just don't know what the motive was. It wasn't an opportunity, you know? Was this, you know, a crime, a passion crime in the heat of the moment? I mean, we don't know. We do know, the jury doesn't know, that George Birch was accused of a murder 20 years ago, but it wasn't the same kind of circumstances. It didn't involve a woman or a lover. But you think about this, what's in it for him to kill her and then hope that no one ever figures out he did it?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't know what the motive would be. I mean, maybe it was a last-second decision on his part. I can't leave her alive because she can identify me. I have to dispose of her. We don't know what was going on. We don't know if he did it or if Douglas did it, but the story is far-fetched. And I think once investigators came to him, because again, the DNA was discovered in August. She was found in May. So several months had gone by where George Birch could have gone to investigators. He had watched it on the news. He knew her name. He knew Douglas Dietrich was in jail. There were several months where he could have said, here's what happened, but he didn't. And that's what the prosecution is going to play as well. You saw the defense saying, hey, Douglas, why didn't you report this sooner? That's what the prosecution's going to do when Birch takes the stand. Why didn't you report this?
Right. Right, that is a good point, because if that did happen, what normal person would then say, okay, let me go back to my normal life?
Exactly.
And so it's a lot of questions here, and I tend to think that, you know, and this is still very early on in the trial, but I tend to think that this will not be an easy 1-hour deliberation in the juror's room once the trial concludes, at least from what we've seen thus far.
Yeah, I don't think this will be a quick deliberation. I don't think this will be a quick trial, to be honest with you. I think there were over 100 witnesses that may be called to this. Again, this is the trial of the century for Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Right, yeah. They've got the Packers, and that's over for now. A lot of people have their eyes on this trial for sure. So let's go back to yesterday's testimony from Douglas Dietrich once more. He was on the stand actually for 2 days as he talked about the night Nicole went missing when he last saw her. Let's go back to that now. Welcome back. That was more of Douglas Dietrich on the stand yesterday. He is the boyfriend of Nicole Vanderhayden, who was murdered in March 2016. George Birch now on trial in her murder. And Vincent Hill, law enforcement analyst, we just heard Douglas Dietrich talk more about the exchanges he had with his girlfriend Nicole that night. They had been out at a concert. They then went to a bar together. Then she went to another bar. They texted back and forth. She was clearly mad at him, thought he was talking to other women. They had several calls back and forth. There were other friends involved. In that testimony, Doug Dietrich did say that he took a puff of a pen, perhaps marijuana, that night, and we heard the defense in a different clip cross-examining him bring up that he had snorted Adderall. Does that make a difference, these drugs that he used? I mean, we know he has admitted to drinking heavily that night. The fact that he drank heavily and perhaps used some marijuana and snorted some amphetamines, does that make any difference here?
I don't think so. I mean, if you look at the side effects of each of those, alcohol, marijuana, Adderall, none of those are psychosis or these angry outbursts. Those are not side effects of any of those narcotics. What I did find interesting, though, is that Douglas kept saying he wasn't angry by these text messages. Now, I've been married twice. I've gotten some pretty heated text messages from my ex-wives. Believe me, they made me quite angry. So I don't understand why he's just playing this off like, no, I wasn't upset. Yeah, I think he's playing to the jury to divert attention from him, but I can't believe that he wasn't upset by those text messages as a man.
Right, and he says, you know, I didn't get it. I was kind of puzzled when she's saying something like, you still like whores, and, you know, a lot of vulgar language in there, calling him an abusive asshole, right? And yeah, he does seem a little nonchalant about the whole thing.
Yeah, and those aren't random texts that you just send in the middle of the night just for no reason. Nicole had a reason to send those text messages. Obviously, there's a history there between the two, that either he cheated on her in the past, she accused him of cheating in the past, maybe he was abusive. Just because it wasn't reported to police doesn't mean he wasn't abusive. There's a lot of domestic violence victims that don't report to police. So there could have been a history of abuse and all of these affairs that Nicole was upset about that night. And we know one thing about alcohol, it turns our emotions up. So she's been drinking, she's sending these text messages, but yet Douglas is, I don't know why.
To your point, if there was a history of abuse here, because there was, I believe, a text that had come out, like that, where she said, "You hurt me so much," and we don't know whether she meant emotionally or physically. But if there was a history of abuse, I mean, she has a sister she's somewhat close with. Even the babysitter that night was a friend of hers. They seem to have a close-knit group of friends. You would think that other people close to them might have known about that and maybe would have raised that as a concern. Look, he was abusive to my sister, my friend, whatever.
Well, we could assume that, but I can go back in the history. Look at Nicole Brown Simpson.
Right.
She had been getting beat for years. It wasn't until O.J. was charged with her murder that came out. So we can't assume that she confided in a sister or confided in a friend. We can't assume that, because one thing about being a victim, you do exactly what your abuser says. So if he says, don't tell anyone, psychologically, you're not going to tell because you don't want the abuse to continue.
Yeah, no, that is an excellent point, Vincent. Well, let's go back into the courtroom now and listen a little more. Again, just a reminder that the live trial is expected to resume in just under 15 minutes. The court on break, but the judge said that court will resume at 2:15 Eastern time. Of course, we'll have that live feed just as soon as we get it back. But in the meantime, let's go back to listening to some more of Doug Dietrich's testimony.
We're all kind of up and about, getting going a little bit
Yep,
there.
yep. And then I was really getting concerned at that point, you know, and then I tried contacting Nikki and everybody that at that point, making calls and texts.
Again, who are you contacting then once you get your phone in order to try to get things rolling to find Nikki?
I contacted Greg, my parents, I contacted Dallas, and then we did, wondered if, I think Dallas had mentioned if she was in jail, checked the jail records, did an inmate search to see if she was possibly in jail, and then asked Heather to ask her mom if she could call the hospitals to see if she was at the hospital or anything like that, and I said something I wouldn't be able to call for HIPAA rights, and that her parents should, and called my parents and said, you know, I don't have my car here, and I had told Greg to come over to give me a ride to my car, and said, we gotta, try and find Nikki here. And
did you make attempts to contact Nikki directly as well during that point in time?
Yeah, I believe I sent her a text, and maybe, I think tried calling her and her phone was still off and went directly to voicemail.
Welcome back. More testimony from Douglas Dietrich on the stand. That was previously recorded testimony from earlier in the trial this week. This is the murder trial of George Birch, who is charged with murdering Nicole Vanderhayden, Doug Dietrich's girlfriend, live-in girlfriend, the mother of his baby. Here we hear a little bit more detail about the morning after, the day after, Nicole has gone missing, and Doug Dietrich is still a little nonchalant up there. He wakes up at 6, okay, feeds the baby, goes back to sleep, wakes up at 11. Well, maybe she's hungover, sleeping somewhere. He's only at 2 o'clock. He starts to get really concerned. He says, calling friends, calling the babysitter they'd had that night, calling his parents, where friends start to sort of mobilize, call hospitals, call police departments. Maybe she's been arrested. And you can sort of see here he does appear to have been concerned at that time.
Yeah, but the bigger question is, why did it take so long to get concerned of the mother of your child? You wake up at 6:30, and like most men don't like to wake up to crying babies. The first thing we do is, where's your mother? Like, I have 2 children. I did it when they were at that age, right? So to wait until 2 o'clock, even though she had been drinking, you had been drinking, she's hung over. At some point, you say, where are you at? Our child needs a diaper, he needs this.
Right, right.
Where
I think
are you
it's
at?
one thing if the couple didn't have this infant, this 6-month-old.
Exactly.
If it's just the 2 of them and you say, oh, she got pissed and she slept somewhere else, or who knows. But, the little details here, the fact that Nicole was breastfeeding, there was breast milk left for the baby. So, it's not like she's some totally careless parent who would just abandon the child for this many hours at the time. I think, to the average person and certainly to the outsider, it does raise a lot of questions. And of course, this goes to the defense's case, the case that they're trying to prove that it was Douglas Dietrich that did it. But as we know, he was arrested initially. He was released. Police and prosecutors didn't have the evidence, and they say Birch is the one who did it. So just to bring you up to speed on what's happening right now, in just a couple of minutes, court is expected to resume after the lunch break in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Before the lunch break, we heard from the lead investigator, the detective on the case, and we are expecting more testimony from experts as soon as court resumes. I know a couple of people are starting to file back into the courtroom. Vincent, just talking about what we have heard today so far, going back to, I know now we've been listening to Doug Dietrich's testimony for almost an hour now. We forget what we were listening to before, the lead detective in this case, Brian Slinger. But right before they took a break from court, he talked about the DNA processing, how actually in August, so almost 3 months after Nicole was found dead, they found a match on a DNA from Nicole's sock to George Birch. He was not on their radar before then. This was an interesting detail to me because I personally hadn't realized that there was this three-month lapse. So basically they released Doug Dietrich after 2 weeks, and then it's just an open case. And then they find this DNA match. As someone in law enforcement yourself, I mean, the detective says, they put this DNA into multiple databases, and up comes a hit, and sure enough, he had contact with the Green Bay Police Department in June of that year. Does a light bulb go off and say, wow, maybe we have someone here?
Yeah, initially it does. You have DNA tying a person to Nicole's body. But the bigger problem is if the DNA was only on the sock, as we heard in that testimony, why wouldn't Birch's DNA be over her clothing that was found somewhere else? There's touch DNA. Why wouldn't it be on her body? They haven't disclosed that yet.
Right.
It very well could have been.
And my guess is that it probably was because he's admitted to having sex with her.
He admitted to having sex.
Right. So why did that hit not come up before that sock? That is a good question, and certainly one I had as well. Also some interesting technological aspects about this trial. They're talking about how after they brought Birch in, he consented to handing over his cell phone, right, and they were able to use Google Dashboard to track his GPS, the location he was, through GPS and cell phone tower data. They got a subpoena for that. And so it's interesting because, as we've also been talking about, we know that the prosecution wanted to introduce Fitbit data into this case to say, oh, well, Doug Dietrich was wearing a Fitbit, and the Fitbit will show he was sleeping at the time. So a lot of interesting technology data points here.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing about technology, it can be challenged, it can be questioned. Anything with technology has flaws, it has faults. And again, we're assuming that Douglas Dietrich went to bed, he had on his Fitbit. He's the only one saying that he had on his Fitbit. We don't have an independent witness to say, yes, I saw him asleep in his bed with this Fitbit. So he could have very well left that Fitbit at home to give the illusion, the impression that he was at home during this entire thing.
Right. Again, we'll see, you know, how much of a part that ends up playing. And a little while ago, we were speaking about whether Birch will take the stand when the defense begins their case sometime next week. And you said if he wants to prove this story that it was really Doug Dietrich that did it, he better take the stand.
He has to. He has no other choice but to take the stand to say, I didn't do it, this guy did it, and here's why, and here's how he did it, and this is what he made me do.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot at stake if he does take the stand. I mean, right now we can talk a lot about Doug Dietrich because we've not only heard investigators describe their interviews with them, but we've seen him testify for hours and hours now, so we're starting to get a sense of his demeanor, the kind of person he is, a little laid back, a little nonchalant, but really we don't know much at all about George Birch and the kind of person he is and his demeanor, and so obviously when someone takes the stand, you learn a lot about them.
Absolutely, and I'm sure George is being coached right now by the defense. When you take the stand, make sure you make eye contact with the jury. Make sure they feel your emotion. Make sure you get your point across. He's being coached to that right now, so when he takes the stand, he's ready to do that.
Yeah. And that certainly will be interesting. If that does happen, it should be sometime next week. The judge has blocked out about 2 weeks for this trial, and who knows, it may even go a little bit longer. Again, we are waiting for the case to resume. It should be any moment now, as a few people are beginning to file into the courtroom. But we're going to give them a few minutes to get settled, and we'll go back once more to some of the testimony, some more of the testimony from Douglas Dietrich from yesterday.
At some point in time, did you become aware that a body had been found?
We were all sitting around the kitchen table. You know, Heather and I, we looked on the computer. We were trying to look up her phone records. I think we got into her Sprint account or Google account and looked at her tracking, and it showed right where, right by the sardine can was where like her last known coordinates was, and it was like a weird like line that went directly to Wausau and then directly back or something like that, and it's like, thought that was pretty odd, and I told law enforcement about that, and then we were trying to look for her here, and all of a sudden I think Heather got a message or a text or something on that order that there was a body found and in Bellevue or something on that order. And
what did you do upon hearing that?
Everybody just started freaking out and like, oh my God. And I think my mom said, stay positive. We don't, it's just, I think that's Nikki, and let's wait to hear it. And everybody was crying, it's stress level, and it was just, I don't know, it was just a blur. And
Sure.
And shortly after that, I know somebody had said like a medium or something, said she was okay or needed some time, and we thought that was a little odd that somebody said that to, I don't know if that was Heather or Nikki's mom, or I don't know, I just remember that being mentioned.
Do you remember at that point, did anyone try to find out any more information about the body that had been found?
We had the news on, and then I think it was a 9 or 10 o'clock news, and all of a sudden there was it said a woman's body was found in Bellevue, like Brule or something like that, and it was just, I don't know, it was, everybody's emotions were.
At that point, did you become more concerned that perhaps this was
very, very concerned at that point. It was, I didn't know what to think. I was trying to stay positive, but then I was like, it's, oh my God, that could be her, and it.
And then shortly thereafter, did you have further contact with law enforcement?
Yeah, we were all talking with each other, and I think 2 officers showed up again and asked if I would give them more information on the missing persons report, and I said yes, and they rode in their van down, I think it was with Steffens, and I think somebody else was riding in the back, and I was riding in the front, and we went to the sheriff's department.
How long were you at the sheriff's office?
Another couple hours, three hours at least, I'd say.
Did they tell you that you had to go down there, that you were under arrest?
No,
You went down there voluntarily?
yes, I did.
And did you again answer questions for a lengthy period of time?
I did.
And what time of night was this when you went down there?
I think it was close to midnight. I mean, it was getting late, and time was just flying by that night.
And officers had additional questions for you?
Yep,
You provided information?
yep.
At some point in time, did officers provide you a little bit more detail that would suggest that the body found was Nikki's?
Yeah, after they asked some, characteristics of Nikki and everything, and they said, that there was some similarities or a lot of similarities, but they couldn't confirm that it was Nikki, that the body that they had found, and I don't know, it was something on that order, and I had a lot going through my mind at that point, and it was
How did that make you feel when you heard that?
devastated, shocked. I don't know. I was just a lot going through my mind. I was just so puzzled and shocked and hurt, sad. I mean, it's a whirlwind of emotions. And
At some point during that second interview with law enforcement that occurred at the sheriff's office, did officers ask you about your potential involvement in the case?
I think they did ask me if they had anything to do with it, and I did say no, I had nothing to do with it.
Did they ask you for some additional evidence to collect from you while you were at the sheriff's office?
Yes, they had asked if they could search my home, and I said, yeah, that's okay. Go ahead. And
then how about clothing items?
yeah, they asked what I was wearing that night, and I had the same jeans on at that point, and I told them what shirt I was wearing and the undershirt that I was wearing and what shoes I was wearing. And then then they took my shoes and the jeans that I had on, because I was wearing the same jeans that night as I was the night before.
In fact, the shoes and the jeans that you were wearing at the sheriff's office then were the same ones you wore the previous night?
Correct, yes.
And you gave them to the police?
Yep.
And gave you different shoes and pants to wear home?
Yeah, they actually, I don't know, it was weird that they gave me Greg's pair of pants and shoes. I was a little puzzled by that, and I was just kind of, I don't know, I didn't know what to think. It was just a very upsetting time.
Welcome back. We've been listening to some more testimony from Douglas Dietrich that took place earlier in this trial. Douglas Dietrich, of course, the boyfriend of Nicole Vander Hayden. George Birch is on trial for her murder. The murder happened back in May 2016. She was found strangled with blunt trauma to the head. Her body was found naked in a field a short distance from the home she shared with Doug Dietrich. Vincent Hall still with me here. Thank you so much. We've been talking about this case and about the defense's theory that they're trying to prove to the jury that Doug Dietrich did it. But one thing you and I were just discussing was, well, Dietrich, first of all, has shown himself on the stand to be a rather laid-back person. He wasn't too worried when Nicole wasn't there the morning after she went missing, not even the afternoon. It wasn't until later in the afternoon he got worried. He seems to be a pretty sort of relaxed, laid-back person. He's admitted to drinking heavily that night, to smoking some marijuana, to perhaps snorting some Adderall, so we know he was on drugs. But would he have been able, if the defense's theory is true, would he have been able to commit this murder and come up with this plan to force Birch to help him dispose of the body so quickly? I mean, there are no neighbors that have come forward saying they heard a commotion outside.
Yeah, I don't think he could have pulled this off, being drunk under the influence of narcotics, without making a lot of mistakes. Because think about this. This is a guy who would have come home, saw his girlfriend, the mother of his child, having sex with another man in his driveway, which is the ultimate disrespect. And as a man, I can assure you, the only thing I would have done to George Birch, it would have been more than knocking him out.
Right.
There would have been a commotion. There would have been a fight between me and George before I even dealt with Nicole. So to be able to pull this off in the heat of the moment when you're that angry, because, yeah, he's laid back about those text messages, he's laid back about her walking away, but no man is laid back seeing his girlfriend having sex with another man.
And it's questionable, the defense's theory, because presumably they're depending on what time they are alleging this happened, the babysitter may have still be home inside the house, who's obviously looking out for the parents to come home. I mean, she may have fallen asleep, it was late, but you've got neighbors who seem to be aware of each other, not too far apart on this block. We know that some blood was found across the street at a neighbor's home. At first he thought it was nothing, probably animal blood. It was only when he found out the neighbor had been found dead when they called police. So if there was, you know, a commotion, as the defense is trying to suggest there was, when saying that Doug Dietrich held George Burch at gunpoint and said, "Help me dispose of the body," then you would think someone would have heard or seen something.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because Douglas would have had to have gone into the house to even get the gun. Again, we're assuming the babysitter was there waiting for the parents. She would have seen this, and she would have asked Douglas, "What are you doing?" "Oh, well, Nicole's out having sex with someone." Someone would have picked up on something other than, "Oh, I knocked George out, I killed her, and I made him dispose of the body."
I mean, who knows the exact timeline they're alleging? Maybe it was after the babysitter left, but even then, the baby is a factor in all this. So he says he woke up with the baby by 6:30 that morning. Just a lot of questions here, and kind of a lot of holes in both theories, both the prosecution and the defense's theory. Again, in my opinion, the biggest hole in the prosecution's case here is, what was this guy Birch's motive? But you know, it was a crime in passion. You mentioned there was opportunity for it. We don't really know what this guy was like. We know that we know the jury doesn't know that he was acquitted in another trial, murder trial 20 years ago. And we also know, though, from testimony, that he has had contact with Green Bay police before, and I think it will come out, if it hasn't already, that they were looking into him for some kind of hit-and-run accident, for leaving the scene of an accident.
Yeah, of course that doesn't make you a murderer, but we don't know what he's done in the past. We don't know why his DNA was on file with the police and with the national database. Obviously, there's some type of criminal history there that he's associated with. We don't know that. And during the break, we heard the producer say, "I don't like the boyfriend." Right? I'm sure a lot of people are saying, "I don't like the boyfriend." But we have to have evidence to prove that the boyfriend did this.
Right, and of course the judge will remind the jury of that when he gives the jury instructions to go and deliberate, you know, that you have to base this on the evidence you have heard, not just one's opinion of a person, but, you know, whether or not it's supposed to, that always does play into how jurors feel and whether or not they think a person is guilty or innocent.
Yeah, absolutely, because one thing to keep in mind is jurors are exactly what you and I are. We're human. Like, we put emotion into this. As a parent, you have a small child. You can only imagine what your child will be going through while this is going on outside the home. As a father, I can only imagine what would be going on in my mind if that was my daughter. So, yeah, to say you're a juror and to say, yes, follow the law, it's not always that easy.
And ultimately, yes, of course, like any murder, this is a very sad story. You have a little boy now, you know, just two years old, who now has no mother, and there is this terrible way in which she was murdered, and so it is a sad story. Just to bring you up to speed, taking a quick look, some people are starting to file back into the courtroom in Green Bay, Wisconsin. The judge had said that court was going to resume about 15 minutes ago, but it does look like they are running a little bit late. As soon as we have the live feed back up and running and the judge is back in the courtroom and bringing the jury back, we will go live to that immediately. But in the meantime, we're going to go back to a little bit more from Doug Dietrich's testimony.
And did you decide not to provide a sample at that time?
Yes, I decided not to at that time.
Really, really late.
If you have to take off,
And
by all
did
means.
you have any advice from anyone prior to making that decision?
Yes, I did.
I don't want specifics, but what factored in the determination not to provide the sample?
Well, with talking with my parents and everything, and the possibility that parts of our conversation
Was that still the case in May of 2016?
I don't know how recent, I mean, in that near time frame that we went over that conversation. It's sometime after Dylan was born and a few months old at least.
In May of 2016, were you closer to breaking up with Nikki or closer to marrying Nikki?
I would say, I mean, in between there was, you know, we had some arguments about a few minor things, but we'd always, you know, sit down and discuss them, and then, you know, think how we could move forward from that, and, you know, just continue.
Welcome back. I'm Stacey Delicat. Thanks for being with us here on Law and Crime Live. We have a live picture right now out of the Green Bay courtroom where we are waiting for the trial against George Birch to resume. Vincent Hill, law enforcement analyst, thank you for being here with us. Let's go live to court.